So since the last video, I did some painting of the basket, added some metal flake and clear coat, and the next step is going to be to put the cone onto the voice coil, finish the cone assembly. So that's what we're going to do next. I also did a similar sort of thing to the sort of trim ring. Anyway, that's where that's at. Just to recap on what's happened since the last time I made work that I did on this since the last video. So that being said, I've temporarily screwed the basket to the motor. I'm going to have to put a little bit of glue in there and put all 6 bolts in, but right now I'm just using it temporarily to align the voice coil with the cone assembly. I've put these 2 blocks to hold the direct leads on. I think I probably posted a video or something anyway, or probably a photo. It's just a direct lead block that bolts on and it pinches the wires in between it. So we use that to hold the wires in place. It just fits together like this. Pop that on there, put a bolt in, wires go through, pinches them, fantastic. So first thing we're going to do is drop this in and center it. I've got 2 layers of film, plastic film. We're going to slide this down onto here. It gets the voice coil nicely centered over the core there. Line it up with the terminals. Then once you do that, make sure everything is good. Just for information sake, this is a very, very tight gap on this one. So there's not a lot of room for error. Not that there ever really is, but we're looking at, let's go with millimeters. I can't even read this in inches. Yeah, it's below the minimum that this thing will even read. 0.1, it's 0.18 millimeters. Anyway, not a lot of room for error. It's usually not quite that close, but anyway, that is what it is. So this cone had to be modified to fit loosely around. The idea is that when we drop it on to the voice coil, it sits on the basket flat with the bolt cutouts lined up, centered, with no lift, because when we eventually clamp it down, we don't want to put any sort of tilting pressure onto the voice coil. The voice coil is currently aligned with the pole or the T-yoke or whatever, and so when we eventually screw this all down, we don't want any pressure on the voice coil. So what we're going to do is we're going to glue it in place. I'm still kind of hemming and hawing about whether I'm going to flood this also with an epoxy after everything is nice and centered and sitting flat. great at holding things in place, but I think that the volume that we want to see on there might be better to do in epoxy. Okay. Well, ain't going anywhere now. Drop right there. There we go. So now let's just hold these out for a moment. See how this thing. So after I glued the cone to the voice coil, I pulled it off and did in here, right in there, so that it is glued on both sides. It's a little bit tight to get in there, and it gets kind of noisy. That the next part gets kind of noisy. The other thing I did off camera was I used some black high temperature epoxy and did inside the cone so that there's a nice even bead of epoxy sitting in the valley there, just to give it that extra reinforcement. I did run a small frequency test just to see that it is capable of running without any coil rub, and it most certainly is. So we'll just have to be very, very careful when we glue everything into place and make sure that it's aligned properly so that it gets a nice, clean, undistorted sound. Obviously, it wouldn't really be fixing a sub if you put it together and when you hooked it up it was distorted. That would be something that needed fixing. So we'll make sure that when it goes together and we put it in a box that it sounds absolutely amazing. It's going to be a very, very lovely sub when it goes back to its owner, and it's going to sound amazing. It's going to be hitting some very high decibels, and I'll probably make a video of that too. Anyway, next video will be hooking up the direct leads and mounting everything to the basket, and probably will include putting the dust cap on with that. It's going to be one beautiful sub when it's done.